So I got around to reading about two-thirds of your book. I'm looking at my phone right now. I got to the page, well, the chapter about Real Housewives.
Oh, okay.
Page
Nice, nice.
two or so. This book was released on Zero. Released on it. I'm talking about like it's an album. It was published by Zero Books.
Mm.
When exactly? Earlier this year.
Yeah, at April 1st in the United States, and like a week earlier in the UK. So pretty recently, yeah.
Okay, and it looks like it covers the period up until Trump's losing the election, but Biden not yet being sworn in. So maybe it was
Yeah.
wrapped up in that kind of 2-month interim at the end of 2018.
Yeah, I actually I finished writing it a good deal earlier in time than that. I finished like I submitted it to Zero Books right at the end of 2019, like December of 2019. So this was like a whole different world. It was before the pandemic and all of that. So
Yeah.
they had just said yes to it. Um, in December of 2019. And then we went into the editorial phase a little bit in the first couple months of 2020, and kind of like as like the pandemic was kind of kicking off. But with publishing, it just takes like forever. And I think with the pandemic, it like slowed things down quite a bit more. So although I wrote it for in kind of 2018 and 2019, it didn't come out till 2021. So I was worried about that because I mean, you know, in our kind of high velocity discourse these days, a year or a year and a half is a really long amount of time. But I was actually kind of surprised. I mean, I wouldn't say pleased because there's a lot of so much negative that has gone down since then. But I was surprised or intrigued by how much of it kind of held up through all of that disruption, kind of.
Yeah. Luckily, the subject matter it goes far back enough in time that intense topicality doesn't seem like it's a huge issue here.
Right. Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
the whole phenomenon of reality TV began late '90s, was clearly
Yep.
underway to most people in the early 2000s. Um, so yeah, this is not so much. Your book is not so much a history of reality TV as such. Can you explain what it delves into at kind of a high level, I suppose?
Yeah, so I kind of wanted it to be a general theory of reality television, and to kind of explain why I felt that it was the privileged popular art form of our time, or the privileged popular narrative form of our time, compared to fiction television shows, films, novels. All of those things are great, and of course, are still a big part of my life and our lives. But reality television occupies a very special kind of status for me, and I find it exciting and captivating, and just kind of just theoretically interesting in ways that I don't that I'm not as excited about other more traditional forms of storytelling. So I wanted to endeavor to say kind of like, what is it about our cultural moment, our historical moment, that makes reality television such a perfect vehicle for telling stories and for showing human experience? And I also wanted to tie it into kind of the political situation that we kind of face today. It was almost a coincidence. I mean, I would have written this book whether or not Donald Trump had won in 2016, but he did, and we had a reality TV president, and there were questions about the fragmented nature of social reality happening in a very mainstream way. They were talking about post-truth politics on CNN, and you know, it became like a buzzword and things like that. So I wanted to kind of tie it into the political moment as well, and the impasse that I think the left has found itself at as it tried to, I think, during the Trump years, rediscover a traditional materialism or a traditional kind of linear class-based politics. So I wanted to address that, and then to also take these kind of core examples from the history of reality television, which I chose mostly because they're kind of my favorites, or the ones that I've had the most experience with. But then to kind of use those as an example for kind of the way their formal properties, their formal contradictions relate to our own kind of difficulties in our culture today.
Yeah, it seems that the three top reality TV shows that get the most almost said airtime, thinking about television, but read time in your book are The Hills, The Bachelor, and Real Housewives of insert locality there. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So those are the main three. Yeah, reality television. I recall in the early 2000s, up until about the mid 2000s, people were saying that that was the future of television because, you know, how could it not be? Audiences clearly seemed to love it. It was so cheap to produce compared to scripted television and all these, you know, well-known actors and their agents trying to secure a lot of money for them. So it looked like that would be the future. It would be kind of a Jackass on the low end and, you know, The Bachelor on the high end or a Survivor on the high end. That's being generous, right? I mean, that's only to Jackass is something like, you know, Survivor sort of. But then in the late 2000s, we had prestige television. AMC, that cable network, seemed to figure heavily in that. They gave us Mad Men. What's another Mad Men?
Breaking Bad.
Breaking Bad. Yep.
Yeah.
The Walking Dead was huge too, but that wasn't so much glamorous or prestige. But it did help kind of breathe new life into what people thought was dead. Speaking of dead, and that is scripted television. So, you know, then of course Netflix. Early on, Netflix's own offerings were kind of higher end compared to everything that's come since. House of Cards, Orange is the New Black was another one. So, television scripted stuff seemed to be punching back and doing quite well. And then reality TV, of course, didn't go away, but sort of became junior partner in the television viewing experience. So yeah, so your book is focused on somewhat more glamorous reality TV. Lately I've been getting into, or I guess maybe renewing interest in hoarders.
Yes.
Something like that. It's like where might your view of that side of reality TV be kind of less glamorous, less to tie it into kind of demographics and politics, the kind of reality TV that's maybe less congenial to the preferences of professional class women? What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on that side of reality television?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things about reality television as a genre is that it's really kind of not a genre. It's really an entire form. So you have all of these diverse types of shows in there. I mean, depending on how kind of broad or narrow your description is, it could even include things like sports or cable news or things like that, are technically forms of reality-based entertainment that take advantage of a lot of the same kind of tricks and tropes that Real Housewives does. But within what's recognized as traditional reality television, there's such a great diversity of content. I don't have a ton of experience with that particular show, Hoarders, but I certainly know what you mean. Kind of, I think is that on Discovery Channel? Is that right? I forget.
Like a lot of people, I see it when it goes up on Netflix.
Oh, okay.
Things, will first air out in the cable television universe where people are paying money for, and then a year later or so, it finds its way onto Netflix, and often the origin point gets lost.
Yeah, so, there are others that are kind of like these very kind of disturbing human spectacles, like My 600-Pound Life or something like that. If I'm remembering correctly, I believe it is Discovery Channel that has this kind of crazy, for lack of a better term, it's, what in the early 20th century would have been called, the freak show, like, where you see like these appalling kind of human specimens. And so, I mean, there's certainly the same kind of the same thing going on there, where it's just so captivating to see something so shockingly abject as what's going on in the Hoarders, or the extreme kind of obesity problems. But
I feel like a show like Little Women LA, Little Women Atlanta, Little Women Dallas, that's sort of a bridge between the kind of pure circus sideshow exploitative thing and kind of a guilty pleasure, but not terribly guilty as far as exploitation. Real Housewives, fabulous type of
Right.
reality
Right,
TV.
exactly. That's exactly where I was going to go with it. And so I don't quite know what a lot of these shows do, but I think that there is, for a lot of people that watch it, also a humanistic side. Is that, maybe at first, early in the episode or something like that, you're kind of shocked by how kind of repulsive it is, but then you understand there is a real human being in front of the camera there, and you kind of begin to, since it is a real person, I think our brains are a little bit kind of attuned to that, and you kind of immediately have this kind of empathy response to the person, and you end up, understanding the depths of humanity that are out there and the broad range of human experience that's out there, and so it can be very kind of broadening to one's perspective. People who have, very, very serious kind of medical problems or very serious psychological issues that have kind of informed their entire lives in these extreme ways. I mean, that's very, very raw human experience. And kind of attuning ourselves to that, and or like exposing ourselves to that, is what great literature has always been about these kind of extremities of human life. And so I do think there's a very positive function to it. I mean, on the surface level, it seems like people are just gawking, but my suspicion, and at least my experience in watching kind of other types of reality TV, is that might be the kind of the first phase, but the second phase involves a lot of empathy and understanding and relatability with the people on the other side of the camera.
Yeah. I recently watched an interview with someone who edits reality TV for a living.
Oh yeah.
And she was talking about the various subgenres of reality TV. The docu-follow. I believe the term was docu-follow for something like Naked and Alone, or Naked and Afraid, I think is the
Oh,
show.
right. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the more gossipy, less kind of outlandish scenarios. They show real people of a sort, but they're just living a somewhat more fabulous life than typical people. And so something like Real Housewives would depict people that are actually quite normal relative to someone with a strange sort of they're glutton for punishment for outdoorsy experiences and extreme experiences or something, right? But again,
Yeah.
your book focuses on somewhat more of the, I guess, normie side of reality television. The Hills. Can you talk about that? That's one I don't know too much about. Is that
Oh yeah.
the oldest of the three, or is The Bachelor the oldest of the three?
Well, if you go back to kind of the original premiere of The Bachelor, that has been on much, much longer than The Hills was. The Bachelor, I think, I forget the exact date, but it premiered shortly after Survivor. It was one of the original kind of institutions of reality television. So it's been on since the very early 2000s. But I haven't been watching it that long. I've only been watching it for probably 6 or 7 years or so. A lot has happened in that period, but The Hills is a little bit more retro too. It's a little bit more mid-period, so it wasn't part of the first wave of reality TV with kind of Survivor and stuff like that. It came out in more the mid 2000s. Okay. So I was just thinking about this because Laguna Beach was the precursor to The Hills, and that focused on the characters in.
Sounds like a Baywatch type of show.
Yeah, well, it was like kind of about rich kids living in Orange County. I mean, it was just like the OC. It was, I think it came out at the same time as the OC, and it was kind of billed as like the real life OC, about these kind of like rich kids who live in these fancy communities.
It kind of goes to show you how, earlier in reality TV, the first instincts of reality TV producers was to just kind of document the people who were most readily available, and that is other people living in Southern California.
Yes, that's exactly right. That's exackly right.
That has remained very popular.
Yeah, and it's what they knew, and they did find it interesting. I mean, that's where Real Housewives came from, was a guy who was kind of a all over the place kind of Hollywood type who's doing all sorts of stuff. He just had this idea that, like, look, this gated community in Orange County, kind of interesting people living there. We could probably put together a little show about that. Um, and so, but also, I mean, but there's also this kind of reference to existing fiction constructs, like Real Housewives itself is. It was conceived of as a specific reference to the OC and Desperate Housewives, both. And in fact, Curb Your Enthusiasm was influential on their original idea for the show as well. So you have this interesting
Curb Your
interplay.
Enthusiasm, did you say?
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
Because originally they had conceived of it as like something a little bit more like experimental kind of pseudo documentary where the people were playing themselves like they do on Curb Your Enthusiasm, but they would be kind of telling stories, in a way that was, much more constructed than what you'd find on reality TV. So there's this, from the very beginning, there's been this interesting interplay between traditional fiction and reality television as it was conceived, because it was conceived of as a form of entertainment. And so, The Hills was kind of the prestige sequel to Laguna Beach that came on kind of in the mid 2000s. I feel like around 2006 probably. It was right when I was in college. It was right before I had started getting into reality television. But it's interesting because it was so big at the time. It was very, very big. And as I kind of try to reckon with in that chapter, it is an example of reality television at its most absolutely kind of staged and fabricated, and kind of like they endeavored to really make it seem and feel like a fiction show. Like it almost looks more like have you watched Friday Night Lights? Like
Football show?
yeah, it's almost shot like
no.
that.
But I do know that much. It's about football.
Oh yeah. Well, Friday Night Lights is it's interesting the way it's shot, because it's shot with like a lot of like handheld cameras and stuff like that, and it's not like The Office where they have like confessionals and it's really like mockumentary style. It's more just the camera work. Like The Hills looks more like Friday Night Lights than it does Real Housewives probably. So it kind of like seems like a fiction show, but it is made out of the raw materials of reality. And although they did a lot of kind of ridiculous things like holding fake conversations on the phone or filming scenes in somebody else's house, it wasn't even the character's real house. At the same time, I mean, Heidi and Spencer are still together. They've got a whole family. Like their experience on that show, was real. It was part of their lives ultimately. So we share a timeline with the people on that show, regardless of how staged it was. Unlike a way that we would with characters that are truly fictional.
Yeah, when I first saw The Hills mentioned in your book, my first thought was actually Baldwin Hills, which I know that's a neighborhood of LA. It's a wealthy black neighborhood, from what I understand. Was that ever
Okay.
a show of its own? Was that a reality show?
I have no idea. Actually. I think that they're referring to like the Hollywood Hills of LA, because what happens in the show is like the main character moves from Laguna Beach, which is in Orange County, I believe, to LA for like college or for like an internship or whatever they're doing. So it's kind of like her like striking out on her own. And it's a very, very LA show.
Yeah, that is very LA, basically moving from what I consider one part of LA to another part of LA and calling it striking out on your own. It's so large. It's so large that be 30 miles away, and it's considered like, quite the distance if you're in the area, but to everyone else, it's just part of the broader metropolitan sprawl.
Yeah.
But so the show The Bachelorette,
Yeah.
it seems like lately that has been getting a lot more buzz. Is that more popular now than The Bachelor, or is it like a close second or junior partner in the whole Bachelor?
That's a very good question. I've always viewed them as kind of co-equal. members of the franchise. Like The Bachelor was the original, and it's been running a little bit longer, but for as long as anyone can really remember, that you've always had both. And they started changing this in recent years, but it used to be like a closed loop where every new Bachelor would have had to come as a runner-up on The Bachelorette, and every Bachelorette would have had to have been a runner-up on The Bachelor. So they were closely linked shows always. I don't know off the top of my head whether one or the other is more popular at this point. But I would say I probably hear more negative things about the Bachelor series as opposed to the Bachelorette series. Like the fans often have all sorts of issues with who gets chosen to be Bachelor, and many Bachelors are kind of vilified for their conduct, or kind of really put through their paces in the after show, whereas the Bachelorettes tend to be, not always, it depends, but tend to be kind of I don't know, more aspirational figures to their audience, and more kind of like unambiguously supported. That's not always the case. There was one Bachelorette who went through this whole kind of like slut shaming controversy for doing something very, very normal on the show.
Did you mention that in your book? I recall something about that. Someone fans piling onto someone in your book. I recall that.
Yeah, exactly. Caitlin Bristow. Yeah, she like has she sleeps with one of the kind of contestants who was one of the kind of the central guys who kind of made it all the way to the end. But she sleeps with him like a few episodes too early. Like you're supposed to wait until episode, 8 to sleep with all of the people. You're not supposed to do it before. And I mean, kind of what it was is that like, my understanding is that like that sort of stuff happens kind of all along without the cameras rolling. This, they decided to kind of feature it on the show and make it part of the storyline. And the fan base, especially the very kind of conservative fan base that they have, really kind of erupted in scandal over it. It was interesting to watch because it's a ridiculous show. I mean, there's nothing traditional about dating 20 women at the same time anyway. So why are we talking about, chastity?
Yeah, there's sort of a, what was that show? This is going back to the 2000s era reality television. Something and Tiaras.
Toddlers and Tiaras.
Oh boy, that even more so. That's got a somewhat of a tribute to traditionalism, but in a more crass sort of way. That was more controversial to traditionalists than I think this is, and that too weird.
And it's interesting.
Understand why anything that implicates kids is going to be very, very controversial.
Yeah, and there's this weird contradiction to that whole thing where I believe I'm assuming here, but I'm guessing the areas of the United States that kind of like have these like toddler beauty pageants and stuff like that are probably the red states, probably kind of the more Christian communities.
Right.
I'm guessing, and so
that narrows the audience a bit.
Yeah. And it just
a little more generic aspiration.
Yeah, I mean, it speaks to the whole kind of interesting contradictions of kind of like American Protestant Christians, of how the mega churches and like materialism among kind of wealthy Christians, and kind of the traditional kind of religious right and stuff like that. So it's interesting. I actually had my cousin actually message. It's funny you mentioned that show. My cousin messaged me like a week ago saying he just watched it for the first time, and it was the most insane thing he's ever seen, and that he wants to watch like all 9 seasons now. But I've never seen that one either. It's another one that's a little bit like a little weird.
I want to say that Honey Boo Boo came out of that, but I'm not so sure she did. I think Honey Boo Boo was somewhat later than that.
I forget where she came from. Yeah, I forget where she came from, but something like that.
I watch a lot of YouTube to something that feels even more sort of, I guess, non-prestigious. So reality TV is, notably, you mentioned that it's something people are, especially professional class people, are a little bit embarrassed to admitting watching. But spending a lot of time watching YouTube, the kind of parasocial nature of that I think, is even lower on the totem pole. But I was watching a YouTuber discuss reality TV, and she was saying that the kind of wild side or the wild days of reality TV, of the type that gave us Honey Boo Boo and her mom, that's somewhat behind us now. And that, I don't know what your thoughts are on this. Now people who aspire to be on reality TV all understand what their role is going to be now. They know what kind of reality TV subgenre they should be aiming for. So this kind of the Wild West days of people just acting unpredictably is somewhat behind us, as they all know now how to perform in a nominally non-performance, non-scripted way. Right?
Yeah. I think that this is a very a key point. I completely agree with it. And I mean, and some of it also has to do with the kind of the sensitivities of our cultural moment are also pretty uptight. So you can't have the sorts of things that you had in the mid 2000s, either kind of regarding sex or any of the exploitative elements that have often been a big part of reality television. And kind of like you said, or like you mentioned that this YouTuber was talking about, is that eventually it becomes too kind of self-conscious, and then it does begin to feel a little bit staged. Like this has been definitely a big issue in the Real Housewives area, and so a lot of those shows, they've been going 12 or 13 years now. So with each year that passes by, the pool of kind of upper class, middle-aged women who have never seen that show and really don't, know anything about that show grows smaller and smaller. And so they do try to cast women that don't have, a really good idea of what the show is about and stuff like that. And the new women usually say they've never seen the show.
Yeah, like trying to find a pool of jurors who are not somehow affected by media discussion of the event.
Right. Like imagine, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so they try to, but it's becoming less and less that you're able to do that. And something I revisited recently was Rock of Love from like 2007 to 2010 or something like that. I just rewatched all three.
I feel like that show came directly out of the kind of peak libertine liberal reality television era.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. Yeah,
sort of nipped in the bud now. Yeah.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, the fluid chauvinism and objectification that Bret Michaels kind of has throughout that whole show. I mean, he's not even doing it to be kind of like shocking or offensive. He's just completely being himself on camera, showing exactly kind of, what he's looking for in women, and making, just observations about them as they kind of show off for him. I mean, you could never have it on television today. It's just it would be completely derided and condemned. And so we are living in a very, very different cultural moment, different expectations on behalf of the audience, different expectations on behalf of the cast members about kind of what they want to accomplish. So yeah, I mean, it is changing. Hopefully we can see it like maturing, or that it will kind of attain additional kind of positive characteristics that we're not expecting yet. But who knows? I mean, maybe it'll just get more and more boring, and we'll have to turn to something else.